Welcome everyone to our session on relationships and intimate partner violence. We have two of our presenters here with us today, and one of them is going to be recorded. So actually, we're missing some people. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Just give me one quick second to confirm that everyone is actually here. There's Amber. I don't see Amber. Okay, well, maybe we'll get started with TSA. Does it make sense for you to start? And then if Amber joins, we can do their presentation afterwards. So I will just start by saying, welcome again, everybody. Sorry for the false start. TSA is co-author on the paper Intimate Partner Violence, Biphobia, and Mental Health, Bisexual Women's Experiences from Brazil and Italy. And she is a clinical psychologist in private practice, PhD student in social psychology, member of the Brazilian National Network of Studies on Bisexuality and Monodissidence, and bisexual feminist and Latin American. Can I pass things over to you, TSA?
Okay, thank you, Terlin. I'm just gonna share my screen. Just a second. Can you all see it?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Well, can I just start? How does it work?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm very grateful of being here in this space discussing such an important theme. As she mentioned, I'm a PhD student. I'm in the third year of my PhD research, which focuses on the experiences of bisexual women. And today I'm going to present a bit of this work on this work entitled Intimate Partner Violence, Biphobia and Mental Health, Bisexual Women's Experiences from Brazil and Italy. I often think it's important when we talk about violence experiences to talk about the systems of oppression in which those violences are often rooted in. And when we look at the experiences of bisexual women, I think we are at least looking at two systems of oppression for starters, which is monosexism, which I'm sure we all discussed a lot about it in this conference already, but this social structure that affects deeply our lives as bisexual people, and that it's based on the idea that monosexual identities are more legitimate and superior in comparison to plurisexual identities, such as bisexuality. And heteropatriarchy, the social political system in which cisgender male heterosexuality holds supremacy over other gender identities and sexual orientations. But of course, not all bisexual women are the same. So we can be looking at other systems of oppression that can be affecting the experiences of violence and victimization and mental health of bisexual women, and systems of oppression based on class, race, ethnicity, nationality, disabilities, age, citizenship status, and so on. So it's very important to have at least an intersectional sensibility when we look at the experiences of bisexual women, on understanding that they can vary according to different contexts and social categories and identities. And what is IPV, intimate partner violence? According to World Health Organization, IPV is a behavior by an intimate partner or ex-partner that can cause us physical, sexual, psychological harm, and it can be expressed by physical violence, economical violence, psychological violence, or sexual violence. Here we have a few data that we often encounter when we are trying to talk about IPV and bisexual women of empirical studies regarding this population. First of all, while being in a relationship can be considered a protective factor for monosexual individuals, bisexuals may experience more stress and mental health issues when they are in a relationship. Bisexual women in relationships with monosexual partners have an increased rate of domestic violence in comparison to women in other demographic categories. And some studies suggest that bisexual women are more vulnerable to suffer sexual and physical violence in comparison to heterosexual and lesbian women. And it's very often that we see bisexual women reporting feeling sexually objectified and fetishized by their partners. And even though this is all very concerning data regarding bisexual women and intimate partner violence, we need to take a look at where this data is produced, because most of those studies are in the global north and in the United States, some in the UK, but there are a lot of countries where there is a huge gap on studies regarding this population. If we think about Brazil and Italy, for instance, which are the two countries in which I'm doing my empirical research, we have a very impressive gap in the literature regarding bisexual women experiences and IPV. And if we look at general reports on IPV or gender-based violence or violence against women in general, they most often don't talk about sexual orientation. So we have no idea in which, what is the extent of this problem in our cultures and societies, which is why it's very important to develop studies that are specific for our context. So this current study, I'll be presenting some preliminary data of my thesis that it's entitled Violence in the Intimate Relationships of Bisexual Women in Brazil and Italy, an Intersectional Feminist Understanding and Psychosocial Intervention Proposition. Due to time, and also because I'm still in the preliminary analysis of the data I've collected, I'm going to focus on my quantitative data, but I also did some interviews with 34 bisexual women from Brazil and Italy, two focus groups with professionals, researchers, and activists to understand how they understand IPV on bisexual women and what do they think it's important in their health interventions. And all that to be able to propose a psychosocial intervention that I am currently at the pilot group. But today I'll be presenting mostly the data on my quantitative step, in which participated 2,521 women. 79% were Brazilian, so close to 2,000, and 520 Italian, and 21% Italian. And this study, I did the, how does it called? The divulgation through online settings, saying that it was a research regarding bisexual women experiences and relationships. I didn't mention violence because I also wanted to see a little bit of prevalence, since we have this lack of prevalence studies in Brazil and Italy. So in my sample, we found that 57% of women that participated in the study reported psychological violence, and 44% reported sexual violence, which is almost half of our sample. It's a very high number of victimized women. Alongside with that, 22% reported physical violence perpetrated by a partner and 10% economical violence. And those subtypes were based on the World Health Organization measurements on IPV that I mentioned before. But I also thought that it would be important to add some bi-specific or LGBTQ-specific victimization expressions in order to better capture the experiences of bisexual women. So that's why I added a few other questions as well. So when they asked if a partner ever threatened to disclose their sexuality without their consent, 12% reported yes. 64% reported having lived situations where they were fetishized or objectified by their partners. And 59% reported having their sexual identity invalidated by their partners. And alongside with that, the data that it's very important when we look at mental health outcomes is that most of our samples, 67%, experienced polyvictimization, which means more than one type of victimization. Still on victimization experiences, I think this is interesting as well. In the beginning of the IPV questionnaire, I asked if they considered that they ever lived some sort of IPV in their relationships. And in this moment, 57% reported yes. After being presented with the examples by World Health Organization, 64 reported violence, but after adding bi-specific violences, 81% of our sample reported that they felt they suffered IPV, which means that not only we need to work better on campaigns of sensibilization of this problem so we can recognize violence in our relationships, but also we need to adapt or at least think about the measures we are using to evaluate this problem. A few other results is that only 10% filed a formal complaint. And in Brazil, if you look at this data only in Brazil, only 3.3%, and only 1% of them were referred to specialized services. which shows us a very important issue with our network that should be supporting women that suffered violence. Most of the perpetrators of IPV were identified by the participants as cisgender and heterosexual men, which I think is very aligned with international literature in general. And related to mental health, we found mild indicators of stress, moderate indicators of depression, and severe indicators of anxiety, with the Italian sample showing higher symptoms for everything, despite lower IPV victimization rates. So of course, we need to explore better our data set to understand those differences. But our first hypothesis is that it has something to do with social, cultural, and legal context differences, and how mental health can be impaired by different situations in those two countries. And even though some colonialist perspectives also often lead us to think that European countries always have better legal frameworks for LGBTQ communities and women, it's not often the case. And when we compare Brazil and Italy in the legal context, we see a very expressive difference, with Brazil having a more prepared, more inclusive.
Maybe we'll post it on our timeline.
Okay, I'm wrapping it up.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what was said, sorry.
I'm not sure where that actually came from.
Okay.
I don't
Okay.
see anyone unmuted, so sorry about that, but carry on. Yeah.
No, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I was running out of time because I know I can talk a lot.
No,
But
you're okay.
So I was talking about those social, cultural, and legal context differences. But even though Brazil even has like a own resolution on bisexuality by our psychological board, it's not very often that we see those legal frameworks applied in reality, which is something we can see in here, that only 1% were referred to specialized services. So I think it's important to better explore the social cultural differences to also understand this data. When it comes to biphobia, we found something that it's very aligned with literature, the international data. I used the anti-bisexual experiences scale, which evaluates biphobia perpetrated by lesbian and gay people and also by heterosexual people on 3 different dimensions, being those ideas regarding sexual orientation and stability, sexual irresponsibility, and general hostility. The only significant difference that I think it's important or interesting is that heterosexual people perpetrated the most biphobia related to this idea of sexual irresponsibility, while lesbian and gay people perpetrated the most sexual irresponsibility, anti-bisexual experiences. When we look at this data, and not only the quantitative, but also, of course, in my mind, I have the interviews and the focus groups, I think that what calls my attention the most is how we are still very rooted in heteronormative understandings of IPV. And even though understanding gender as a very important system of oppression that causes vulnerabilization of women, we also need to take a look at specific situations of bisexual women, because bisexual women can experience biphobia in multiple levels, and this could render them more vulnerable to IPV situations, or not being able to disclosure those situations, or getting help, mental health support, legal support, and so on. Because biphobia can appear within the relationship perpetrated by a partner. I saw a lot in the interview situations like, my partner would be very insecure because of my sexual orientation, thinking I wouldn't be enough. So they became more controlling, more violent over time, and more insecure. It can affect social perceptions and how peers, family, friends, and others perceive victimized bisexual women, often led on by misogynistic stereotypes, understanding that this woman didn't suffer violence, or minimizing the situation, and understanding that they were guilty of the situation they experienced. We also have systemic inequalities, and biphobia is deeply rooted on a lot of those systemic inequalities in a lot of levels of services. And this could add to additional barriers in accessing those services. In the focus groups, I remember one coordinator of a human rights center on LGBTQ community saying, I don't know what to do with bisexual women when they have a male partner. I don't know where to refer them, because this represents the idea that they shouldn't be on an LGBTQ center, which renders a lot of monosexual stereotypes in those spaces as well. But it can also affect self-perception, because throughout the research and the interviews, it was very often that we saw those women minimizing the experiences of violence or self-blaming, thinking that it was their fault or they deserved it, or they held some sort of privilege that meant they should endure those type of violence because they were privileged in comparison to other monosexual identities, which we can also challenge based on a lot of this data regarding violence and mental health and so on. Well, I know the research has several limitations, especially because I'm presenting preliminary data, but also due to research design and so on. But I think we can think about important implications based on this data. First of all, so we can contribute to the theoretical understanding of IPV in relationships of bisexual women, not only using models proposed for heterosexual or lesbian people as the main reference, but rather the experiences of bi women themselves, which I think it's very often when we go to IPV literature that it's always heteronormative or lesbian. So it's very difficult to find bi-specific literature regarding this, especially interventions. The need for targeted interventions to address the unique vulnerabilities of bisexual women and to develop more inclusive public policies and health services that are tailored to the specific needs of these women. And I also think that cross-country comparisons can offer an opportunity to evaluate how different social, cultural, and legal contexts can impact the experiences of violence and associated health outcomes. And this could inform the design of international collaborative efforts to combat violence and improve overall well-being of bisexual women. Here I won't present, but this would be the next steps of the thesis regarding refining these quantitative findings and understanding some intersectional positions and how these affect the pathways of victimization, analyzing qualitative data, and working with the proposal psychosocial intervention proposition. Thank you. I hope I didn't pass too much on time. And this is my email in case anyone needs to contact.
Perfect on time. Thank you so much, TSA. Is Amber with us? I just want to double check before we. Okay. I think what we're going to do next, if there are no questions for TSA. Oh, actually, Anna has a question. So maybe while Anna pops her question in the chat, I will queue up our pre-recorded talk. So just bear with me for one quick second. Okay, before we get started, I just want to bring Anna's question to you, TSA. So can't remember exactly what was on there on page 8, but just wanted to understand better, please. And then also intervention, what do you mean by that?
Okay, do I answer that before the next presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anna, for your questions and for your feedback. On page 8, I think it's the biphobia measurements. Is that what you refer to? Okay, so we used a specific psychological instrument that aims to evaluate the experiences. We would say anti-bisexuality experiences, which could be a synonym for biphobic experiences that you may have suffered. And the instruments evaluate if they were perpetrated by heterosexual or lesbian and gay people. And it also is divided in 3 dimensions, which one of them groups all the biphobic experiences you suffered regarding this idea that bisexuality is a less stable sexual orientation. The other dimension groups sexual irresponsibility beliefs, biphobic beliefs, and the other one groups general hostility experiences. So I was just showing a bit how this appeared in my sample with most of the anti-bisexual attitudes and perpetrations being made by heterosexual people, and focused on this idea of sexual responsibility and sexual responsibility and instability of sexual orientation. And by intervention, I think this could be a very Brazilian language as well. We call it interventions in health settings. I'm trying to develop a proposition of a psychosocial intervention, a group intervention, which would be a group for bisexual women, where we would meet once a week for 8 weeks and discuss specific topics that could be important for women who experienced violence, but also bisexual identity and so on, with the focus of promoting mental health, sense of well-being and belonging on bisexual women. But that's what I mean with intervention. But it could also have a broader meaning on our policy making on mental health, thinking how can we better qualify professionals that work with bisexual people and so on. So I hope I made myself clear. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. So as I mentioned, our next presentation is a pre-recorded one from Lila Webb, and Lila graduated from the University of Calgary in May 2024 with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. So this presentation that we're going to see is based off of her honors thesis from her bachelor's degree, which was co-written by her wonderful supervisor, Dr. Susan Boon. Lila is currently working at the University of Calgary, where she is passionately involved in advocacy for the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, a role that she cherishes and hopes to continue. So I'm going to attempt to reshare my screen. And here we go.
Hi there, my name is Lila. Thank you so much for having me today at the Bisexuality Research Conference. I'm really excited to be joining you, and I apologize that I am not live, but thank you for your patience and thank you for tuning in. So my presentation today will be about bi-visibility and bi-positivity in romantic relationships. This is coming from the University of Calgary, from Alberta in Canada, and my supervisor for this project was Dr. Susan Boon. Just a caveat, this project was conducted for my thesis for my undergraduate honors degree, so please keep that in mind as we're going forward, but I'm excited to share the results and to talk to you all about this. So first, I want to start with a positionality statement. Positionality statements are very important in all research, but especially research involving the queer community. So just for me, I am not bi, I am gay. However, I am a very strong ally and advocate for the queer community in general, and I have lots of different friends who have come to me over the years with issues similar to what I'm talking about today in this presentation, and I want to help. I want to find answers, and research was my way to do that. So I'm coming at this from a perspective of trying to marry my personal experiences with my professional development and interests. And for me, what this means for my research is that it's really just coming at it from a way of trying to help people and trying to find support for bi+ people. So I hope that makes sense, and I'm excited to keep going. So why does this matter? Obviously, we're at a bisexuality research conference, so hopefully everyone here cares, but just in case you didn't know, bi+ people represent a huge portion of the queer community. Over half of the queer community. This is a huge group of people, but they are severely underrepresented in research. And when they are represented, it's typically in a negative fashion. There's tons of research about why being bi+ comes with stigma and stereotype and just all these horrible things. And while it's important to recognize these factors, it's also important to go forward and to learn about different ways that positive experiences can come from being queer and being bi+. So within romantic relationships, there's even less research for bi+ people. What we do know is that bi+ people are less likely to experience the benefits of romantic relationships that other groups do benefit from. And this is most likely due to the erasure that bi+ people experience in relationships. So often we assume that people are gay or straight based on the gender of their partner. And this assumption can come from society at large and also from their partner. This can be really invalidating, and it can lead bi+ people to feel like they have to choose between being themselves and being authentic and being in a relationship, which is not a position we want anyone to be in. So with that in mind, I chose to look at two key phenomena in this study. So I looked at bivisibility as one of them. Bivisibility is often done in response to that erasure I was just talking about. This is just any way that help people feel more visible in their bi+ identity. It can be done both directly and indirectly. So direct would be, for example, coming out as bi+. And indirect would be ways like where you're, say, wearing a bi flag on your backpack or having a pansexual sticker on your laptop. These are indirect ways to show people that you're bi+ without saying it. So the most common way that people do this is indirectly. We do know that feeling visible is important. Feeling visible has a lot of protective psychological factors and can help increase your social support. In relationships and romantic relationships, being visible can help build trust in the relationship and also help the bi+ person feel a higher sense of personal well-being. However, if it's received badly, it can also be a very negative thing. It can lead to hypersexualization of their bi+ identity, sexual history inquisitions about their experiences, and blatant erasure as well can occur in relationships. So we need to learn more about how and why bivisibility occurs within romantic relationships so we can better understand how to support people in getting those positive aspects of it. Bipositivity is the second element that I explored in the study. This is a very new topic, so there's not much research available on it thus far. However, it's really important to understand. So bipositivity is really just anything that helps people feel more validated or respected or acknowledged in their identity. We know that it has lots of protective factors in mental health, for example, increasing identity affirmation and lowering levels of internalized bi negativity. But that's kind of it. And in romantic relationships, we know even less. We do know that there's this interesting phenomenon about ambivalence that often appears within romantic relationships. So ambivalence is interesting because it's not overtly positive, but bi+ people will often interpret it as positive. So for example, their significant other didn't explicitly deny that they're bi. So they're like, oh, that's a great thing, that's positive. We don't know why this is interpreted as positive, and I don't know what the effect this has on the relationship as opposed to overt positivity. It's important to know more about how positivity can manifest in relationships so that we can better support bi+ people, and understanding that ambivalence piece is also really important. So that leads me to my research questions, which were how is bipositivity experienced within monogamous romantic relationships? How is bivisibility experienced within monogamous romantic relationships? And how do bipositivity and bivisibility influence the relationship itself? So it's important to answer these questions so we can help fill that gap in the literature and find better ways to support relationships. So to do this, I did a qualitative study, thematic analysis. I ended up having 7 participants. My inclusion criteria were just that they were over 18, were in a relationship of minimum 3 months, and that they were self-identified as bi+. Yeah, so even though there was only 7 participants, there was data saturation beginning to occur with the sample, and I actually hope to continue the study and gather more participants so that I can better support the data I was finding. I also can't report any specifics about their demographic information just due to the small sample and local data collection. However, I can confirm that it was a diverse sample and that there was lots of different partner gender identities and ethnicities represented. So my results. I'm going to break this down, please don't worry, but I basically found 5 major themes with their own sub-themes related. So first, under the research question of bipositivity, I found 2 key themes, and they were the absence of negativity and bipositivity through conversation. So basically, absence of negativity did pop up, which was very interesting because, like I said, ambivalence is reported in this area commonly. 6 of my 7 participants talked about this. Absence of negativity often manifested, like this quote says, they felt accepted when they weren't treated negatively. They appreciated, they maybe had past bad experiences in relationships, and so no experience is a good experience. They felt their partners weren't trying to change them, or they didn't have to hide their identities, and this was all perceived as positive. So that was really interesting. They also talked about how often they felt bi-positivity through conversation with their partner. So, for example, they were able to talk about their past partners of multiple genders. They felt like they appreciated their partners listening to them. They weren't afraid to talk about their history, or they didn't feel like they were walking on eggshells when talking about it. So all of these were perceived as positives in their relationship. Okay, so then we move into my second research question of bi-visibility, and there were two major themes, which were the reasons for it and the strategies for how it was enacted. So first into the reasons for bi-visibility, which is on this screen. The two sub-themes were why they didn't and why they did enact bi-visibility. For reasons that they didn't, why they did not, mostly the reason revolved around feeling that their bi+ identity wasn't integral to their full identity, or that it was just kind of a trivial piece of information, like this quote says, just like learning their favorite color. Or they thought that their whole identity needed to be appreciated and not just the bi+ aspect. They also sometimes were wary of negative responses to their identity. Reasons to enact bi-visibility often were the opposite. So they felt that their bi+ identity was an important part of their self-concept, and they wanted their partners to acknowledge that. They also just wanted to be true to themselves and to combat that erasure that often appears within relationships. Also, interestingly, some used it as a litmus test of sorts, where they used their partner's reaction to them coming out as like kind of a gauge to see if this was a relationship worth investing in. So that was really interesting. So for bi-visibility strategies, there were two ways that this occurred from my participants, and they were enacted by their partner and enacted by themselves. So by their partner, interestingly, a lot of them relied on drawing in external sources to their relationship. So things like TikTok or movies or TV shows, and using those to initiate conversation about identity. And people really appreciated this. They thought that their partner taking an active interest in them and their identity was perceived as really good. Yeah, so this was really a good tool to raise awareness. Enacted by themselves is often just what I was talking about, indirect and direct strategies to try to make themselves visible. This was also a validating experience for them. They felt good knowing that they were combating erasure within their relationship. My last thing I just wanted to mention quickly was that they also saw changes in their relationships over time with regards to their identity. So for some, it became more positive. So like this quote, they just became more comfortable talking about their identity. And for others, it was becoming normalized. So they felt like there was nothing else to say with regards to their identity. Both of these weren't bad things. They were just interesting changes over time in their relationships. So discussion, why does this matter? Why am I here? This is important. Understanding the nuances of bi-positivity and bi-visibility and how the significant other's actions are perceived by that bi+ partner is so important to try to add to that previous literature I was talking about, close those gaps, and find ways to improve relationship experiences. So just boiling down what I just talked about, basically small actions from the significant other matter. Things like just talking in gender-neutral terms about their partner's past relationships, that felt really good to participants. And also initiating communication, like with tools like external media, that was also perceived as really positive. So basically what I'm saying is that it wasn't enough for participants to just be, for their partners just to be okay with their identity. What they really appreciated was seeing their partners grow and engage and participate actively in creating a safe space for that bi+ identity within their relationship. That was what was important to them. Now, I can't make any causality statement and say that because of this action, their relationship improved. I don't know. That's not for me to say, and that's not the point of the study. What I can say is that participants appreciated this action. They felt good about it, and that's important in its own way. So strengths of the study. This was a semi-structured interview, so participants had lots of space to talk about their experiences, and I got a really robust data set. Also really important was that after a lot of the interviews, participants said that just talking about their experiences was a positive experience. They said that was a positive identity experience. That's a strength, getting to support the participants and have a directly positive impact on them. That is a strength of the study. Yeah, so I consider the whole study design to be a strength. It is also a limitation. Obviously, with any qualitative research, there's not many participants. This one particularly had a low participant count. So that would influence the results. Like I said, I'm trying to gather more, but for now it is low. I also did everything in the study. So I did all the interviews, all the data analysis, the coding, the thematic work. Obviously my supervisor was a great support, but I did do the bulk of the work. And so my bias is probably showing through my analysis as we went through. So for future research, this is an up and coming area. I'm very excited to see where it goes next. If you're interested in this presentation and you think that you see a spot for yourself in the future of this field, take it. It's yours. But things that I think could be followed up on from my study were that ambivalence piece. So that was huge. We don't understand why some people see it as good and some people don't. We don't understand what place it holds in a relationship. And I think that it's a really key piece to understanding bi+ experiences within relationships. Also, the effect of bi visibility and bi positivity on the relationship and not on the person. I tried to probe for this, I tried to ask for it, but I couldn't quite get to that answer. So understanding more about the influence on the relationship would be really important. And lastly, I think that exploring all of these questions from the non-bi+ partner's perspective would be a huge tool for understanding these relationships better. So finding ways to understand the relationship from both sides would really help improve our understanding and help develop better solutions for the future. Yeah. So these are my references, and I just want to say thank you very much again for having me. I guess my final note that I'd like to leave off on is just saying that bi+ people deserve support not only from their relationship partners, but also from academia. So by being here today and by trying to actively engage with learning about this community, we're all doing our part to try to improve the experience. But we really need to start developing an understanding of how our research can actually support people in real time. And I think that by working together, we can get there. So thank you again for watching. If you have any questions about my presentation, please feel free to contact me at this email on the screen and I will happily get back to you. But yeah, thank you very much and have a great day.
Wow, that was a great presentation from Lila. And really interesting juxtaposition with your work as well, TSA. Just going to take a quick minute to check the chat. Okay. Okay, so Amber is still not with us. So I think we'll move on to our last presentation. So Zamo Couché is a dedicated social scientist, activist, and poet focused on uplifting LGBTQIA+ communities in South Africa. Additionally, as a bisexual man and advocate for bi+ visibility, they are working to grow the bi+ movement on the continent. Currently pursuing an interdisciplinary Master's of Social Sciences at the University of Cape Town, the research explores non-normative sexuality, masculinity, and violence through Zulu Indigenous knowledge systems. The presentation titled today is Narratives of Bi+ Experiences Through Zulu Marriage Rituals. So I will pass it over to you, Zamo Couché.
Thank you. Oh, okay, let's do this. Where's that thing? Share. There we go. There's my screen sharing.
Not yet.
Okay, let me try again. How about now?
Nope, not for me.
Okay, let me just. Pardon me for that. Let's just see. Is it sharing now?
Good now.
Awesome. Okay, let's close this. and go straight into that. I was going to introduce myself, but you already introduced me very well. Thank you for that. So my name is Mpumelelo Zamokuhle Zulu. I use all three of my names interchangeably. And yeah, I think we'll just move straight through to the start of this project. Of this presentation, which is going to be, let's close this, which is going to be on reflecting on Indigenous BIPLOS experiences through my research on same-sex marriage rituals ngokwesintu sakwaZulu, which means Zulu culture, but there's a difference, which I'll explain. So here's a quick roadmap. I'll first give a background on my study, then we will unpack a little bit more on bisexuality amongst Zulu people. So some background, last year I pursued a qualitative study during my honors year, which explored how same-sex couples negotiated marriage rituals within the Zulu culture, or as the people corrected me to remind me to say that it's actually ngokwesintu sakwaZulu, where culture is often seen as something that is inflexible and atemporal. Isintu, which means the Zulu people's way of doing things, is something that is ever evolving. The problem of my research was that same-sex marriage has been legalized in South Africa for over 2 decades now through civil unions. However, for Indigenous communities in South Africa, both the marriage is only recognized socially and spiritually if the specific rituals have been completed. Now, for same-sex couples within Indigenous communities, the customary marriage law in South Africa does not recognize their union, and little is known about how same-sex couples would engage in such a union from an Indigenous ritual point of view. So I had semi-structured interviews with 9 people. That was divided into 2. I had a group of cultural experts or conduits of Zulu culture, but also people who, 6 people who went through the marriage rituals with a same-sex partner. Key findings in my study were that the marriage rituals are very heteronormative. However, the same-sex couples, their families, their ancestors, all negotiated to find ways of uniting, and the ways of uniting either went through a very heteronormative standard where the same-sex couples would engage in those specific rituals, or the emergence of ritual processes that catered to same-sex partnership. Although now this is the part that brought me here to this bisexual research conference. After my study, I found a whole lot to unpack around sexuality, how it's conceptualized ngokwesintu sakwaZulu within the Zulu ways of doing things, particularly around the idea and the practice of what we label bisexuality. So I'm going to, in this part, I'll break down what I found in the literature before I went into the study and what I found from the people I interviewed. Okay, both historic and contemporary accounts of same-sex of the Zulu culture says that same-sex sexual acts are not foreign to the Zulu people. However, they often coexist with people leading heteronormative lives. Here I argue that people are aware that some Zulu people are behaviorally bisexual. So, ngokwesintu sakwaZulu, in the Zulu ways of doing things, it's based on the idea of, or the praxis of Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. A person is a person because of other people, right? And within this framework of seeing the world, heterosexual marriage and procreation are perceived not as individual choices. Maybe there is a certain part, but the overbearing majority find it as a duty to one's family, a duty to one's ancestors, a duty to one's community. Now, this privileges and necessitates heterosexual marriage. Although the literature I found said that, or suggested that same-sex sexual engagements were permissible if one has fulfilled these duties. So now I went into the field and I interviewed people, and what I found supported these claims. So the Zulu people that I engaged with now similarly related sexuality, or the conceptualization of sexuality, as what someone does, as opposed to Western constructions of sexuality as who someone is. Then again, from the interviews I had, particularly with cultural experts, they told me that same-sex sexual acts and romantic interactions before colonization, and also more recently before democracy, were never encouraged nor prohibited by Isintu, or the Zulu people's way of doing things. However, here's a quote from one of the experts. They said, "There is a way for you to live your life and enjoy your sexual orientation while ticking your cultural and spiritual boxes." So it goes again to this negotiation of satisfying what I need to give off for the community, but also what fulfills me as an individual. Narratives I found of now this idea, this conceptualization of non-monosexuality or bisexuality within indigenous concepts. I found narratives of men who had female wives and children at home, satisfying their cultural duties, but also having same-sex partners who are often perceived as friends or something of that nature. On the other hand, I found hidden narratives from one of the cultural experts, because the Zulu way of life or the Zulu culture permits polygamy. So there are hidden stories of women in polygamous marriages where they are both married or they are married to a man, where the sister wives would engage with each other sexually and romantically while the husband was away, which again points us to an idea of, or a practice or experiences of bisexuality within indigenous contexts. So looking into the ideas of bisexuality within this indigenous concept, I had to now sit with the uncomfortability of destabilizing some of the normative assumptions I came in with myself, which now goes into looking at the idea of Ubuntu. We see that it moves away from an idea of individuality to collectiveness. Even the idea of the self cannot be separated from the ancestors, because the ancestors are believed to be disembodied spirits or consciousness that can or coexists with each and everyone who lives within the Zulu way of thinking or way of seeing the world. Then we have people who are spiritually gifted to be indigenous healing practitioners, also known as Izangom. And historically, in research, there have been wide documents of same-sex and heterosex relationships amongst these people. Luckily, some of the people that I interviewed within my research were indeed Izangoma themselves. So what they revealed to me was they perceived much more nuance in our idea of gender, because they saw that gender exists beyond just the physical and the emotional, but it also exists within the spiritual realm. So now it helped me conceptualize something that I will term, for lack of better words, spiritual gender, which points out to say that even though someone may be physically of the same sex, there are ritual processes that can be engaged with from a heterosexual point of view, because the individual, even I, sitting here, may be in a male body, but I might embody a female or feminine ancestor, or myself have a feminine spirit, which now would turn that engagement into a heterosexual setting, right? So in my thinking as an activist, I'm thinking around what do I conceptualize bisexuality as, and whose frameworks do I use, right? I sit here with a lot of questions I don't have answers to yet, but I think it's something that will lead me to even more reading and researching probably, which is the idea of the spiritual spouses. Within my research, there was an interview I had with a cultural expert who was helping a couple who were physically of the same sex get married. However, when they consulted the spiritual advisor, they found that the couple was actually a heterosexual couple in a spiritual sense, where one of the partners was embodying a feminine spirit while the other was embodying a masculine spirit. So they got married through a heterosexual point of view. Another case, which was far more interesting for me, was a case of a couple where one of the partners was Isangoma. So the husband was not Isangoma, but the wife was. And the wife had both a masculine and a feminine ancestor that was predominant in their lives. So what happened there was the male ancestor of Isangoma, who was the wife, asked for a wife of his own or her own. Now this is the complexity that comes in. So now this couple ended up getting married to an additional wife, which now would fall under physically a polyandry arrangement where the wife is the hinge. However, the husband is heterosexual, the wife is heterosexual, and the other wife is also heterosexual, which now leads me to thinking, how do we conceptualize bisexuality within Indigenous points of view if we take Indigenous cosmologies and spiritualities seriously? And this is a question that I bring to you in cases of if you might be doing similar research with Indigenous communities wherever you are, and probably help me think around these complexities. So yes. Apart from that, I'm open to any questions and comments. Here's my email, and that is that. Okay, how do I stop sharing? Here we go. Am I back?
You are, yeah. Thank you for that great presentation. Very interesting.
Thank you.
I know it's obviously very different, but what came up for me was the North American like two-spirit conceptualization. Again, I know that it's obviously a very different context, but the way that you were speaking about, you know, the like gender, the spiritual gender and sexuality.
Yeah, I think that is something that I found really interesting when I was reading up on the two-spirited people. And I was like, this is almost the same thing. The only difference that I would pick up with that in Indigenous Zulu points of view, there can be a case of someone being two-spirited, but also it can be temporal, where the spirit is with you for this period of your life, and then it leaves, and then it might come back and might not. And it may affect your sexuality and it may not. So it's much more nuanced and it's case by case.
Yeah. What led you to decide to choose this as your research topic? Like what inspires you to pursue this?
So this was you mean the topic or the idea around bisexuality within Indigenous points of
Yeah, like
view?
I guess I'm curious what led you to kind of decide to focus on that research.
I think the research for me was really personal in the sense of I am a Zulu man, and at the time of my research, I was in a committed relationship and I was thinking around what would this look like for me to get married? And as someone who grew up in a family that still holds their culture very strongly, what does this mean for me? And how would I go about this in a way that appeases myself as well as my family and my community, how do we hold this together? And also, how do other couples who've gone through the same thing, what have they done? So that was the initial question, although a whole lot came out of the research that I did not anticipate.
Right. I guess that's usually how it goes.